Hello and welcome to this edition of EdTech Monday Africa. We are coming to you from the Transform Africa Summit that is taking place in the famous resort city of Victoria Falls here in Zimbabwe. And the theme this year is Connect, Innovate, Transform. Looking forward to accelerating a competitive, open, innovative, and digitally informed African society. That is what the Transform Africa Summit is all about this year. And this being the 6th edition, 5 African heads of state and over 100 countries in Africa and beyond are represented here, including telcos, as well as other stakeholders in the digital space. And so on EdTech Monday Africa, on this edition, we are focusing on widening the access to ICT infrastructure and connectivity. What exactly does this mean on the African continent, and indeed on the EdTech Monday Africa series? We have previously had conversations around mainstreaming hybrid models of learning and also improving foundational literacy and numeracy, as well as most recently having a conversation around the importance of digital literacy as a crucial component for 21st century skills. And throughout these conversations that we've had on the EdTech Monday shows, one challenge remains constant, that of insufficient and inadequate ICT infrastructure and connectivity. On the African continent at the moment, connectivity to broadband is unaffordable, and the ICT infrastructure needs support from other sectors like the energy sector. 500 million Africans lack access to electricity, and that means that access to ICT infrastructure will become problematic along the way. How do we ensure that we are widening access to ICT infrastructure and connectivity for education? That's our focus on this edition of EdTech Monday Africa. My name is Joy Doreen Bira. Our panelists on the show are
Caroline Mbugua is the Director of Public Policy, Sub-Saharan Africa at GSMA. She leads the development and implementation of industry policy positions through government relations in the region. Dr. Soglo Benvenu, who is the Director of Government Affairs, Africa at Intel. He leads the policy and government affairs work and security and other digital transformation policies. Guilherme Rodrigue, country advisor, Smart Africa, Benin. He leads advisory on Smart Africa topics to the government of Benin. Gael Nsendiyumva, who is the president, Girls in ICT, in Rwanda. She also leads the World Bank funded project aimed at providing electricity access efficient in serving its customers. Kuzai Carlos Chikumbirike, who is the IT auditor, Postal and Telecommunication Regulatory Authority of Zimbabwe. We also do have a live audience with us here, and they're all stakeholders across the African continent. Technology integrated learning has become more popular throughout the world, but in sub-Saharan Africa, there's so many challenges. One of them being unaffordable broadband or connectivity, and also access to electricity. That is the backbone of most ICT infrastructure. At the moment, we do have about 500 million Africans who do not have access to electricity, making broadband connectivity in rural areas even more problematic, with looking at percentages at just 6% in sub-Saharan Africa's rural areas when it comes to broadband connectivity. So what do we need to do? Caroline, it's been, I think, about 13 years since broadband was laid on the African continent, and yet we still have challenges around connectivity, around ICT infrastructure. Which are the areas that we need to focus on in terms of improving access to broadband?
If we take a flashback during the COVID-19 period, countries that had reliable ICT infrastructure were able to continue with their day-to-day lives with minimal impact to cope with the interventions that have been put in place to curb the spread of the pandemic, of the virus. But in sub-Saharan Africa, we saw some countries that closed school for as long as 2 years, while the rest of the world continued on like, nothing happened. We beg the question to understand Why is it different in our region? Why is it that in some parts of our region we have connectivity and others we don't? A lot has been done in the coverage gap, which is now the part of the region that still remains unconnected, meaning no access to broadband services, has continuously come down to about 17% as at 2021. We see a high rural gap of up to about 54%, So then we bear the question, what is causing that disparity? We need to understand the reason why a lot of these areas are not covered is because, one, mobile operators don't find them economically viable because of various challenges that they go through to roll out services in those areas. What can we do? Because yes, we have challenges, but what can we do to be able to overcome these challenges? Then the question comes in, the bigger problem that, in my view, and according to research that we've done at the GSMA, is actually something we call a usage gap. Meaning, we have a considerable number of population that is covered by broadband services and is not using the service for different reasons. And we need to understand why is this. We have several barriers that we have identified. Of course, the first one being affordability. Everybody's saying, there's an issue of affordability of service, affordability of devices, and if consumers in the urban areas are having an issue with affordability, you can imagine consumers in the rural areas, for instance, because of the economic situation in that particular area.
Carlos, as part of the government of Zimbabwe, you are an IT auditor at Portras, and we want to hear from you in regard to the investments that have been made by the government of Zimbabwe. Tell us about some of those investments and how the regulatory frameworks as well are working towards that.
I think it cannot be overemphasized that connectivity is really what makes learning possible. Because learning is actually about sharing information, and sharing World Wide Web, it's all about connectivity. And the Zimbabwean government, through the regulatory authority, believes in creating a level playing field, bridging the digital divide, so that we encourage competition, between the stakeholders, the service providers. When competition has been increased, you are going to have technologies becoming more available also to marginalized communities in the same extent as communities that are not marginalized. So if you invest in schools and education, you have actually invested in the future. So the Zimbabwean government has done a lot of things. Number one, infrastructure availability. There is need to highly and heavily invest in infrastructure. The Zimbabwean government has installed VSAT equipment just in 2022 alone, over 1,116 schools have been connected. Each school has a number of students over 200 plus, and the pass rates, the level of engagement becomes quite significant. There's also been subsidization of the cost of infrastructure deployment. We call them shared towers, where a tower is set up and then the operators can actually put in their base stations on that tower so that we have enough coverage even to areas that would normally not have coverage. We have got labs, 173 computer labs that were constructed and deployed with equipment in schools. That's quite a significant way of contributing to the infrastructure availability in schools. That's number one. Number two, the devices. No matter how much you may have appetite for connectivity, if you don't have the device to connect with, your hopes can only be as futile as anything else. So the government of Zimbabwe, through Portras, has also given out laptops, projectors, smartphones, and thousands of laptops have been distributed to schools. And then usage. You now have to have the actual bandwidth, and the regulator, together with other stakeholders, has subsidized and paid for a full year to over 116 schools in 2022 alone. No matter how much you're told how good the internet is, if you're not there to experience it yourself, you will not really get exactly what it's all about. So the regulator is subsidizing, giving people access for a year, taste it, and then after that, you understand what we are talking about. When you want to have quality education, it's two main aspects that come to play. inclusivity, and also relevance. If you have got everybody connected, you are including everybody. You're leaving no person behind. And it also has to be relevant. And being relevant is being up to date. Back in the days, the internet was split into two categories: content providers and content consumers. You'd be on the internet either as a content provider or as a content consumer. Some people just go to the internet to read what others have put. But with the evolution of the internet, the content consumer is also now a content provider. And that makes information online up to date and relevant.
Right.
So in line with the SDG number 4, connectivity, infrastructure, and access to the internet is very important because it makes learning quite relevant, up to date. After learning, let's see you implementing what you have learned so that it becomes of benefit to our day-to-day lives, education with production. So because of that, learners are learning, they have access to information. It stimulates innovation. It stimulates coming up of new ideas.
So you did mention something around the fact that you have connected areas that lay the foundation for learners as well as educators to be able to use the ICT infrastructure. And I think Caroline also did mention this, that there are areas that have access to connectivity, but there's a problem there, that of digital skills, them not being able to operate the devices that are given them, or even the ICT infrastructure that is laid out for them. Generally across the African continent, only 6% of people living in rural areas are able to use comfortably and satisfactorily use ICT infrastructure.
The CICs I've mentioned earlier on, community information centers, that have been put across the country, do have a section that deals with training. So people in marginalized areas, some people have never seen a computer in their lives, they have a chance to walk into a CIC and receive training from a lot of trainers, such that they are comfortable to navigate the cyberspace, they're comfortable to do it responsibly. There are also risks involved in the cyberspace, remember? And all these things they are taught and learned, and taught, and they learn that until they are quite perfect in that.
Great, thank you. Gail, I want to come to you in regard to broadband and ICT infrastructure. We all know for sure that it is essential if learners as well as institutions are to make full use of what the internet can offer. But we also do see that there are so many barriers as well. Not just from that perspective of them not being able to digitally use the devices or whatever ICT infrastructure is given them, but then we're also saying that there's a great digital divide that needs to be bridged or sort of narrowed. How is the work that you're doing with Girls in ICT helping with some of these challenges around widening access to ICT and also connectivity?
I'll just start with what Girls in ICT is and what we do. So Girls in ICT is an initiative of women and girls that work in and around the STEM fields in Rwanda. We have members ranging from ministers to students in the field. And so what we do is really to try and raise appetite for technology in the STEM fields. I liked what Carlos said about you have to taste it to like it. And so what we do is we do outreach with high schools where we try and interest girls and show them the potential for ICT, but also for the other STEM fields. Currently, high schools, about 47% of public schools or government-aided schools have what we call smart rooms. So smart rooms are an initiative of the government of Rwanda to try and bring infrastructure to schools. And so we meet them there. We meet them at their schools, and we show them the potential for ICT. So for schools that don't have access to that, we also organize various experiments. And as much as some schools may not have infrastructure generally 4G connectivity is available everywhere. So we take our smartphones and we hotspot our computers ourselves and do some demos to try and interest them and show them all they can have access to. And maybe just to conclude, I'll tell a little story. When you asked about whether we had access at their age, at the students who are here,
Right.
it reminded me that my interest in computers was picked up because I have an uncle who used to repair computers. And that was my first point of access to computers. But that was maybe me because I had an uncle who was working around computers. So it's really important for the girls to be exposed to the technology and to what is available in order to raise the appetite and increase their need and their want to access and study technology.
And now I want to come to Intel, because we are in a situation where, on one hand, we need more access to ICT infrastructure, but then on the other hand, we already have some sort of infrastructure in terms of devices, but then again, there is a challenge of how to use these devices, how to maximize the platform that these devices have given to us. And so I want to hear from you around generally technology companies can be in investing in solutions that work for the African setting.
First, I want to talk about our Intel purpose. Right? At Intel, we have a purpose, and our purpose is to create world-changing technology that improves the life of every person on the planet. Right, and as you just said during your introduction, right, we have the COVID health situation, which brings us now in what we call the new normal. And therefore, technology is more important than ever, right? And with the digitization of everything, you will see that every data that we generate have to be moved, right, and stored everywhere. And that is being accelerated by what we call, at Intel, our CEO called the 5 superpowers. And then among those, you have connectivity among that. The number one is talking about ubiquitous computing. Number two is talking about cloud to edge infrastructure, right? You have infrastructure there. Number three is talking about sensing. You have AI and pervasive connectivity. Now, focusing specifically on your question in terms of, what is the last mile connectivity that can enable education in developing countries, particularly in Africa. I would like to talk about the N50 project. That stands for the next 50%. And this is a project in which Intel is one of the founding companies. So what is the problem that we want to solve, just to put things in perspective? So first, around the world, we have half of the population that does not participate in the digital world. Why? First, no connectivity in some cases. Second, no affordability. Third, no relevant content. Right. Number two, there are hundreds of thousands of villages, as you said, in Africa that lives off-grid. Right. There's no electricity. There's no communication. Number three, the carrier service providers, they don't have positive business cases. Right. Because there's no business, the average revenue per user is low, less than $2, right? Therefore, in the N50 project, what we're looking at doing, it is first to accelerate digital adoption and community enrichment through innovative applications, network design, and business model to enable the next 3.9 billion people. And this is around the world. Of course, you just said earlier that we have more than half a billion African that actually do not have access to the
Right.
internet. Then
Electricity.
To electricity, but to the internet, in fact, is even more, 700 million,
Right.
if not plus. In fact, during the last 2+ years, we've been conducting a pilot project in a place called Luombo in Zambia, where we worked with the local community with deep cached content that they asked for. And among those content, we have education. And then we cache them on an Intel NUC. That is a next unit of computing. And then with that, we have a deep CDN, a little bit technical, but the CDN is the content distribution network. So we work with a partner that we call Piconet, and then we set up a private network, right, using wireless connectivity, whether it is 4G, whether it's 5G, whether it's Wi-Fi. And with that, we enable the prioritization of fiber and also low latency satellite. And the reason we're saying, prioritizing fiber and low latency satellite is that we can look at off-peak, and then the most demanding content that can be offloaded to the side, cached there, and then be used for education. So that is, a pilot conducted on the African continent. That is, in fact, I think in the next week, the Wi-Fi connectivity is going to go live.
Great. And are you able to quantify just about how many learning institutions have been able to benefit? Because that, in the long term, is able to determine how many more Africans have been able to be impacted by ICTs and how that could now translate into future skills.
Just specifically in the community, because I think that's where we are getting the data that is showing how the community are participating. So, in fact, for the pilot, we work with one of our partners, and that is called Mwabo. So now we see that the local school is now outfit. Of course, as you talked about earlier, you need to have the right devices, right? There are things that you can do on your smartphone, but there are things that you can, and you need, laptops. So far, what we are seeing a decent uplift in digital participation. And it is estimated around 80%, but we still measuring because it's in the pilot phase. So we want to see how people are participating. And so, as we go, as we go and conducting the pilot, finalizing it, and getting the data that is coming out, this solution can be just taken. And then, let's say if it is in Zimbabwe, let's say if it is in Rwanda, elsewhere, can basically be used because it's been developed within the African context.
Thank you, Dr. Soglo. And now I want to come to you, Rodrigue, because when you listen in to what the heads of state were talking about, President Mnangagwa talked about how education and ICTs need to be incorporated into education, right from elementary all the way to higher learning. And then we also did see President Paul Kagame mention something around the fact that we need more digital skills to be taught to young Africans so that they're able to utilize the ICT infrastructure that's available. And that ties into the kind of work that Smart Africa as well does. And what kind of support really is needed to increase this on the continent? Because with the goals that you have, and that is to make sure that young Africans are able to use ICTs, how can we make this work for education?
Smart Africa want to create a digital single market. We have a project, and Smart Africa is working on the infrastructure part. This project means to make broadband connectivity affordable for the member state. Because if we want people access to network, to connectivity is really important for that. So we are focused on in this project for three main areas. The first one, as I say, is the cost. And for this kind of cost is on the reducing of the cost in the access to internet first. And after that is the access to devices. Because for the devices, it's very important. If you want to make e-learning, education with ICT, we need to access to devices, cell phone, computers, and so on. On this side, actually, we are working on to support a lot of projects with some partners like ITU, with Giga Project, as you know. Okay, that is the first part. In the second way, as I say, we have the challenge in the gaps of access to connectivities. On this part, actually, as you know, we had the lower connectivity prices and direct impact in mobile broadband, so we are working on. And after that, in the last one, we have diversity. We have to provide better diversity and more robust network. In this part, we have the technologies. We are trying to find like alternative technologies. As you know, in Africa, in areas, we need really in rural areas some alternative technologies in partner areas with MNOs, with some partner to make great and stable the accessibility of these connectivities. That is really important.
Great, thank you. Thanks a lot for that. And, you know, with all the conversations that we have around connectivity, around improving and widening the infrastructure, I believe that there are people in the room as well who would like to make contributions around the same.
We are working with partners that extend credit for, amongst other things, access to devices, loans for devices, and so forth. My contribution will come perhaps as a way of a question as well, as we look at widening access to ICT infrastructure. I do believe that to extend ICT infrastructure will also require reliable energy supply, you know, across Africa. I think for the last couple of months, we've seen lots of headlines, particularly in Southern Africa, when it comes to the shortage of electricity. Whilst there's a lot that's being said about green energy in terms of solar and so forth, access to green energy or solar is not at least as reliable or consistent across you know, the different jurisdictions. Would there be no merit in ensuring that as we have this discussion around skills, around connectivity and devices, there's a concurrent discussion around energy so that we're able to unlock access, particularly on the last mile right into the village for these students to be able to access both at the lab at the school, which is connected, I believe, through solar, right to their homes. Thank you.
We are one of the fortunate schools that has been given some of the tools that are being talked about, and we are also connected. And I've realized some of the advantages of such tools in our environment. We are doing what are called the colors continuous assessment that is required as part of the final exam. And I've also realized that we've assigned some of our learners to research, and this has helped us a lot. Thank you.
What are some of the challenges that you experience as well? Because I know that the government is here, and so you might be having reservations around what kind of words you want to put out there. But then share with us what it would look like for you as a teacher if you had access to ICT infrastructure and connectivity. How much better would your experience be?
Helpful. Like, I need to research. There is shortage of textbooks in most of the rural schools. So most of the time, if we are connected, and maybe one of the things that I need to say is our connectivity is limited. The Wi-Fi that we are given by Potras quickly gets finished. So maybe one of the requests, I hope I'm allowed to say this,
Yes.
would be if we would have limitless access to the Wi-Fi. I prepare my lessons using the internet, and if the Wi-Fi is finished, then it means I cannot do it. The students are also limited in a way because they can only be connected for a short period of time. But learning is a continuous process, so we need this connectivity for a longer period.
Thank you so much for the feedback. I think it's positive feedback that learners and teachers are embracing ICTs. In some instances, you have to crank them up to say, hey, fall in love with technology, this is good for you. But we have got great appetite in this side of the, I think other countries also learn from that. I want to submit that the sky is the limit, and we are not yet there, and no one is yet there. But by continuous improvement, I think at some point we'll come to a point where these challenges that are being raised up will be addressed to the dot. The issues of laptop to pupil ratio, the issues of power consistencies, data consistencies, and things like that. We'll come to a point where all that is done. You realize, like you have highlighted, that there will obviously be budgetary constraints because the technology world is ever changing. When you've updated today, you have put all up to the last cent today. Tomorrow there's new technology, which demands maybe twice as much investment as you have done before. So there is need to look into private-public partnership where other stakeholders can also chip in and say, wow, here is a need. There is a great room to improve the nation, the continent, and the world at large.
Yes.
When that is done, we'll come to a point where all our problems are done. I was just thinking in my mind to say, young students and pupils don't need cranking to to love the internet. If you go to Facebook right now, it will suggest for you people you last saw 10, 15 years ago and say, would you like to be their friend? Would you like to be his friend as well? So there is continuous appetite.
Absolutely, and demand that we cannot meet at the moment, which does contextualize things for us. Yes, please.
My experience with ICTs has been very pleasant. It's very accessible from my home and even in school, because I use it for research and other purposes too. And I think it's helpful to even the children who are doing Form 4s this year or rating O-level, because they are doing colors and they really need the research for that. So I think ICT's
Colors is like the equivalent of an examinable level?
Yes.
Yeah? Okay.
It actually increases your marks.
Okay.
It consists of 30% of your actual grade.
Okay, great. Go ahead.
So yeah, I think the ICTs are actually doing a very good job in helping the people and the children, exactly, even the teachers in doing their jobs.
Do you experience any difficulty with connectivity? Do you feel like you'd need more bandwidth for you to be able to, how do I call it, data bundles, yeah, for you to be able to have a better experience using your gadgets?
Yeah, I do, but I think the children actually, who really need that a lot are the ones who are in rural areas, especially girls, because some of them don't even go to school, because in some rural areas, people will still have the backward thinking of that, of the fact that a girl only has to get married or do household chores. Because in the least developing countries, only 40% of young women have access to mobile phones and 14% have access to the internet. This means that a very less number of girls and young women actually have access to the internet. I mean, we've seen the 21st century, like the technology here taking huge strides, and it would really be a shame to see some of the children actually being left behind. I read somewhere an old adage says, I cannot change the direction of the wind, but I can adjust my sails and to actually reach my destination. So we can't really change what's happening around us, but we can help those who don't have access to the internet to do better and actually make the best of it.
We all accept the challenge of devices, cost, but mine will come back to the community where the students come from. What happens when they get home? The parents are very, I shouldn't say naive, but the literacy levels in the communities where these students spend most of their times. So for me, I think all are of a view that as we think about literacy levels in schools in regard to ICT, let's look out on how to involve the general communities, especially the parents. We've gotten to a level of a smartphone. How do we make a smartphone accessible to most of these local communities in Africa? Because parents spend most of their times with the children. So that interface between child-parent would be more productive in addition to what they get from school. So I still say we should ensure that we look at the cost of the devices versus quality. Africa has become a dumping ground. Everyone brings whatever they have. So how do we ensure that communities can have access, first of all, to the devices? Let them have, you've talked about libraries, ICT libraries. Apart from the schools, can we have these in some of these general towns? Say that if a local person who deals in general merchandise, if I reserve some time, can I have to go to this point and access some of this knowledge? People, you may have a smartphone on market, but does everyone know how to use it? Also considering the concept of the literacy levels in Africa.
I'm really excited that there's concerted efforts really to harness ICTs for learning purposes. That's one of my my biggest research areas. My contributions basically to upload the presentations that have been given so far. It shows that there is a real awakening to push ICTs to benefit the young people. As a lecturer, I do desire to use ICTs in my teaching. But one of the things that we are faced with is, lack of relevant content. Indeed, there is so much content available on the World Wide Web, but it's not relevant. So basically, it's a comment and also it's a need.
Yeah.
We as teachers or lecturers, we need to be empowered to create our own content. We need to be assisted to make the content. So for those that are here that are keen to support this effort to widen access to ICT infrastructure and connectivity, I think we need to really spend more money as well on content creation, especially relevant content. Because you see, if I'm teaching something that is related to Zimbabwe, and then I go to the internet, I don't find any examples of videos, even simple videos, even simple audios that are related to Zimbabwe. So we don't have time to do that. So also I'm acknowledging what Intel is doing. The fact that they've been, encouraging people to make simple videos for learning purposes, I think that should be a practice that should be popularized throughout Africa.
Right.
Thank you.
I want to hear your thoughts on this because we're talking about connectivity and ICT infrastructure. Content, yes, it is prime to talk about it, but if we are going to talk about connectivity, and it's important that the teacher mentioned that the bundles ran out really fast. What does that say to the content creators who are creating heavy content that after one download, then the connectivity is gone?
Well, that is where the state can step in, subsidize access to the internet. To connectivity. And I want to say this, but maybe I'm too it's an idea of mine which I've had, and I want to say it now, really. If you guys want to steal the idea, go ahead and steal it. If you actually, if it can benefit the Zimbabwean people or even the African people. You see, we talk of the superhighway. It's really the superhighway. Anybody can access that. But how about having also a national highway? From the global wide web, we also have a local wide web, which can also have the benefits of the internet. It can actually be a platform to teach people how to use the internet. And it can also be a platform to download the content from the big wide web to the local wide web. Already has talked about it, and I'm happy, they are doing that. That should be an effort to actually reduce the cost to access the net and services.
When you say that if these are not put in place, then education becomes a challenge. But we do have situations where studies have been done, governments have been properly advised, but then the action, that's where sometimes we get stuck, because if the government is not implementing, then there's no enabling environment for the private sector players as well to do what they need to do. How do you suggest we go about this?
Thank you so much. And this is something that in my line of work I encounter a lot, seeing that I deal a lot with policy work. We see interventions being implemented in some country very easily, and others in other countries is difficult. And this boils down to political goodwill at the end of the day. What is the level of accountability of our leaders we have for us to actually be able to progress a lot of these policies? Because I keep saying, in Africa, we have the best policies written out. And if you want to come up with a policy or a framework on a particular thing, it will be done and it will be the best written paper. But the challenge is the implementation part of it. Political goodwill, and of course the issue of funding or resources to be able to implement that. So what we encourage governments is to look at when you have targets, for instance, that are enshrined in something like your Vision 2030 or 2040, or maybe looking at digital strategies for the country, you will not be able to meet those targets if you don't implement different policies and frameworks that are in place. So it's helping governments understand how does implementing a framework around EdTech impact, at the end of the day, you reaching your strategy or digital goal. So political goodwill is very critical. And events like this are important because they help us learn from different governments. I like what the president of Zambia yesterday said. Talk to each other. Network is critical because you'll get to understand if you're struggling with implementation of something in one country, how did the other country do it? And you can pick up learnings from that. Because at the end of the day, if we don't start working as one as a continent, looking at our challenges as one as a continent, it will be difficult to progress, because if we look at globally, the trend now is regionalization, so coming together as a continent for the better of our people, that's critical.
Thank you all for being a part of this conversation. Thank you to our panelists who have made it really a great conversation for us to have on this day. And I believe that this is just about the continuation of providing solutions to Africa's EdTech challenges. So thank you all so much for being a part of EdTech Mondays Africa by the Center for Innovative Teaching and Learning at the Mastercard Foundation. My name is Joy Doreen Bira. Thank you all for being here and for making time for the conversation.
Next, on the second part of our two-part series of EdTech Mondays Africa on widening access to ICT infrastructure and connectivity.
What would best work for us in terms of widening ICT infrastructure and connectivity across the African continent?
What we are working on or trying to do is work with partners that can help us at least develop or help the country.
I think we should go deep into looking about sustainability. Government can't afford. The cost of maintenance of technology is high. You can't give, then maintain.
Join us on the 15th of May 2023 at 3 p.m. East Africa time, 12 p.m. GMT on CNBC Africa and on the Mastercard Foundation's Young Africa Works Facebook page.